Matt.
I'm real, Matt, but sometimes you can't tell the difference these days.
Yeah. Real Dave.
I mean, we joke about it, but like we rely on this type of technology to the point that like we don't really second guess it anymore.
No, and we forget how to do things normally. Like I just relearned how to drive without Google Maps because I realized I like couldn't drive to the my like local CVS without the thing on. It's
Yeah,
terrible.
you lose awareness, you lose decision making capabilities, you lose independent thought. You just follow the algorithm.
Your brain shrinks in certain areas.
Yeah, I think that's something I would love to talk about is how these days we have to get even more intentional about going somewhere to actually like think more clearly and for ourselves, you know?
Yeah, if I could touch on this like spatial awareness and map in your head. So at Imaloa, when I was at Here Goes Nothing with you, obviously you're unplugged, like you're trying to have digital detox going on. And I actually built a mental map of Imaloa by the end of it that I hadn't done anything of that nature. It was actually really invigorating to know I could still figure out my way around a not that big place
It
with no
sounds almost
signage,
like you
right?
were,
Purposefully no signage, but you're like, I know where I'm going.
it sounds like you were like on a desert island, a survivor.
We were in the jungle.
Yeah, you get to know everything very intimately. No, it's very rare to step away and actually take some time to ourselves. I was just talking with David Angadi, who's another short-term rental community leader, and he's picked up the extreme marathon running. And I know that you guys are going to do this 50 miler as 50K or something like that. And
Yeah, it's in 2 days, kind of.
yeah.
I don't know why. Anyways, he's a good. It wasn't even peer pressure. I was just, yeah,
Well,
sounded
he was talking about how, 6, 10, 15 hours by yourself is really uncomfortable and awkward. Like no one wants to spend even 5 minutes with themselves without grabbing for a social media feed or like some kind of distraction. So we just got to talking about how much our brains have somehow been conditioned to like avoid sitting with ourselves. And I think that's like a major problem.
yeah, and I think one of the things I love to do is read books from like the founding fathers or like Stoics or because they had to write so much down. Like they were moving at a slower pace in life. Like literally horses go 5 miles an hour. So like that's the fastest they went. There was nothing faster than 5 miles an hour back then from like a normal travel. And you wonder why they had these really deep and like intellectual thoughts about how things work and what's man's place in the world is like we don't even go we're going 100 miles an hour, have no idea where we're going. We're not actually driving. We're like you said, the algorithm is is basically, carrot like steering us wherever our attention, can be monetized. It's terrible.
I've gotten some interesting feedback about these retreats, and people have been saying it almost reminds them of when like a thought leader or a tech CEO, there are these stories of like going into the desert with some
Yeah,
kind of like psychedelic drugs and trying to like find their soul, right?
Burning Man, yeah.
Yeah, and we kind of just like, write that stuff off as kind of extreme, but the discovery process of starting with some kind of question, like what's my next big breakthrough going to look like? Or do I want to acquire this company? Or what's the future of short-term rentals look like? Stuff we don't genuinely don't know yet. Of starting with a frame and going somewhere and actually thinking through on a number of new layers, especially if you have someone to nudge you, someone to challenge your assumptions. That creative process is such a beautiful thing, but we tend to just kind of assign it to like celebrities. I found it's very, very powerful.
Bill Gates does Think Week, which I tried to steal, but I couldn't find a week. Maybe that's actually kind of what we did together in, he goes and like he's shuts off the world, brings like a stack of books on a topic he's interested in, and just lets his brain absorb it and think. And I thought that was one of the most profound luxuries you could ever afford yourself is time to yourself with some sort of curiosity that you can go deep on. But you
Totally.
mentioned other people and multiple people in that same mind state of like, hey, we're gonna find the obstacles and the barriers, or describe your future ideal self, and then why can't you get there now? That was absurdly um uh like that was a big unlock, was just thinking about your future self and why like you kind of doubt how you can get there, and therein lies the obstacle, and this the obstacle is the way, right? Classic stoic concept. So I think you're right, but it's also the other people, and like it builds on other people's obstacle. Okay, like they're struggling, like let's help each other.
Going deep with other people, much less ourselves, is just not something that we do in business that much. Like, especially in our community type setting and our conferences, it's very um, friendly. We like to celebrate. We all work really hard. So it's like a support group. We share in one another's pain. It's not so often that you get a chance to really go deep on any given topic, to get really personal, to really like sit back and consider a question that you haven't been asked before. We don't really get a chance to do that. Maybe a couple times at these events, but I chose to like start at a completely different end of the formatting spectrum and say like, what if we had an entire event around that? What if we had an entire event where we're all electing as leaders to go somewhere new with ourselves and to go somewhere new with our colleagues? And there's a very special feeling when you tap into that. And back to this sort of philosophical stuff, when you go somewhere new with yourself, when you genuinely find something new about yourself, whether it's something you love and makes your heart race that you haven't given, you know, time to recently, or something that you've been avoiding that your like partner has been trying to tell you, but you refuse to acknowledge it. When you go somewhere new with yourself, when something inwards changes, the outer reality shifts. And that's what I find so fascinating about, you could call it personal development, but I'm just thinking of it as creative leadership. If you discover something new as a creative leader, it refracts and it begins to impact all aspects of your business. I find this fascinating.
I mean, how could it not be? It's like it's kind of what makes us human is that we're and it's also explicable in kind of an evolutionary science way. And I'm not an expert in this, but like I'll try to sound like one for a hot sec. Basically, if you're in a new environment, you have your kind of threat radar up, right? Like you took a left instead of a right on the Serengeti. You got to make sure there's not like a lion or a predator there, right? So traveling is kind of like taking a left when you normally take a right. And so you're in a new environment. So your brain is actually, it's why traveling is so exhausting. Like you think flying somewhere, oh, it's like the jet lag. No, it's because all your brain is firing, trying to identify threats or whatever, your head's on a swivel. But then you get there, right? Like to Imalo, to Costa Rica. When we got there, you settle in, and when you push away the normal things like cell phones and the TV or what, basically any modern technology that is completely a warp zone or just like a black hole, what are you left with? Like finally you're calm. Finally you can actually think for more than 10 seconds or maybe even an hour, maybe even 3 days. Like evolutionarily, that is the regenerative side of the exhaustion. So when you think of a yin and a yang, there's an element of like, the sunrise means your energy's up, but the sunset is when your energy goes down so you can regenerate, recoup, and then come back up again. We don't do that, like settle down and relax and unwind and take the time. And like you said, it's where the creativity is. Otherwise, you're just doing the same thing every day.
much less immerse ourselves in nature, especially like a really exotic, like the rainforest is pretty freaking extreme, but even just like going to the park for the day, you come back and your body is changed. It's like physiologically changed. There's something about the rhythm. There's something about just the senses that reset somehow. And this is just not something that leaders do. It's not something we budget typically. We're just constantly going for the next email, going for the next sale, going for the next whatever. It's just not a priority. And I believe this is kind of the thesis for Here Goes Nothing. We have to take a deep breath and take a step back and be like, wait a minute, are we on the right path? Like, do we need to do any course correcting? Like, has the market shifted since we started? Do we need to recalibrate? Do we
Yeah.
need to reprioritize? And doing that in nature, you use the word regenerative. I think that's it. Like, it's really infectious. It's like osmosis almost when you immerse yourself somewhere like that.
Yeah. And yeah, I've when I've been at my lowest or most kind of depressed periods of my life, I find myself going, on nature walks, and you just like I feel I just say called to nature, but it's like the best place, the safest place, the like cleanest thinking I can do. And I think that there's a real property of, it's almost you feel like you're tapped back into like where you belong, in my opinion, right? Like for only probably 2 centuries have we, maybe even one, have we been so excluded from nature in the sound, like it's immersive, right? You're not just there like, oh, I see a tree. It's like you hear the animals, you feel the breeze. Like, actually, I'll tell you a quick anecdote that scared the shit out of me when I was at Here Goes Nothing, but it was like it made me feel alive, and it was this kind of fight or flight thing. So after one night it was like done with conversation, but it was dark and I had my flashlight, but I couldn't remember exactly like which path was faster home. So I just started on one, missed my little turn, and then I felt like I was in the wrong, like I didn't know where I was. And you're in
The
you're in
wrong
nature.
part of town.
You're in nature, and I heard this little rustle. It could have been a friggin' mouse, but I heard a rustle, and that whole primal, like, holy shit, I might die. I'm like, I know I'm not gonna die, but I don't know where I am, and it was like, ah, and I literally started running back. I think I saw you, and I was like, lost my way, and just like was kind of embarrassed. So I went and took the other way home. But like, you don't get that walking down, a grid in New York City where you're just like, oh, 7th Street, okay, yeah. Like it was actually one of the most memorable things. I don't think I've felt that like, much like a, you know, Neanderthal or something where you're like literally like, oh, sound, gotta run.
The whole project started with this problem, which is that I believe business is losing its soul. Not just our industry, not just hospitality, business in general. Like so much business that I interact with, products, services, has become soulless. You could just feel it. And everybody has their own versions of this, whether it's the restaurant that has iPads instead of waiters, or like, these automated wormholes that I got into on this morning on the phone trying to pay my parking ticket. I just got lost in like this digital like loop. And it's very frustrating and it hurts somehow, right? But then we ask, like, okay, well, if business is losing its soul, how am I going to place soul back into my business? How am I going to run my business leading with soul? And that is an incredibly complex question. And it's an incredibly complex discussion because it's different for everybody. What is my soul uh, share? What does sharing my soul look like, right? And the whole premise of this creative process is let's go somewhere and feel primal again in a way, like you were describing.
Yeah.
Let's get scared by something that is completely out of our comfort zone. Let's feel something new. Let's like go and actually reconnect with our soul. And there's certainly an element of spirituality to this. We have Erwin doing his visualizations, his guided meditations, which are just so different than anything I had ever experienced before. You're literally meeting your soul. And this
Future,
is
your future soul. I
your
remember that.
future
Yeah.
soul. And this is like so different than anything we've ever been taught in business class. But then you feel it and you're like, yep, this is what business is missing. And it's like a way to reconnect with that, you know?
Yeah. I like analogies, and I'm gonna go for one to see if this is kind of what you think happened at Here Goes Nothing. So, you know, when you're on an airplane, you see people with these like Bose noise canceling headphones, right? It's like tuning out all of everything, and you want silence. But what you're actually doing is like you're excluding yourself from everything around you from an auditory standpoint. I think when Erwin was doing these meditations, guided meditations, and we're together and we're having these conversations, I think it's actually like taking off noise canceling headphones and then realizing like actually you've been tuning out your own voice
Mm.
and you've been tuning out what your body, your soul, nature, whatever you want to believe in, God is like telling you and calling you to do. And you have to make the time for it. You have to be in the right place. And like, you know, in a way, you have to also be, you know, feel safe to do that with other people with the same intentions. And so I do feel like there was this kind of, you know, you pull the wool off here, whatever the analogy really is, but there was some sort of unlock or just exposure, but it was like quiet enough to hear it. And that was, I know some people got scared by it because they're scared to, you know, almost think that they're not actually acting out what their soul was meant to do. But like, I think that's the heart of it, that you're trying to be like, we have to go there because it's hard.
When I first started working with Erwin like 3 years ago, to your point, I realized that whenever I go out, either to exercise or to walk, I wear my earbuds and I use that function, the noise reduction. So it's like, and I'm just in my own beautiful place where I can listen to any podcast, anything in the world at my fingertips, right? I used to do that. When I started working with Erwin, I was like, damn, what if I was to just not take my headphones out? And I went out without my headphones. I was like, wow, I was missing out. I wasn't actually like tuning into the environment. You could say, well, there's a lot of noise around me. There's a lot of chaos. Fair. But what I think I was really searching for was to be able to actually A, go there by myself, but also to be surrounded by other people who are high caliber, who are
Yeah.
genuinely willing to go there themselves, not lunatics screaming conspiracy theories and lies, but people genuinely reflecting and
Yeah.
genuinely challenging one another's assumptions is just not an environment that we have as leaders these days.
No, no, I don't know if even it's a these days thing or if it's in some ways like we've as a as business leaders, we've created enough systems, like you get to a point where you've created enough systems where you're always thinking about what's next, right? Like what's next? Somebody's got to be thinking about like where we're going, you know, like the captain of the ship. And you look around and you kind of you see the biggest opportunity that you can see like at that moment. But I think that doesn't transform industry. That doesn't generate creativity naturally because you're kind of selecting what you're seeing. Oh, that's the best of the five paths that we could go. But if you can extract yourself completely from even like the business environment, your daily life, your you know, and have kind of this like think week or think, you know, retreat kind of thing, you will hear voices and like your subconscious, all of the sudden, you've taken off the noise cancellation from your subconscious and you're like, holy shit, this is, I was meant, and I will say, there were some people who were like, why am I doing this job anymore? And I
Yeah,
think that I was like, good for you, because you could have been 10 years down the line and had that realization.
totally. It's a terrifying premise. It's like, wait a minute. I actually don't want to be doing this job anymore, and these people are not my people. It's like, whoa, maybe the person that I'm with is not my person, right? Maybe I'm living in the wrong place. Opening up that can of worms is, I think, understandably a really scary process for all of us.
Yeah.
But there's something about the boldness and the curiosity of the people who are like, I'm ready for it. Like, I'm ready to look at that and consider the possibilities. Those
Yeah.
people definitely in the minority, not the majority of business leaders. But when you're in the company of those people, that's a very like exciting group to be around.
Totally. And I think let's talk about community a little bit because communities, as I read in the great book called Business of Belonging by David Spinks, shout out, was communities are defined not necessarily by who they include, but by who they exclude. And I think that there's an element of inclusion by showing up here. Everybody who showed up one way or another was included in that community instantly. And there were a couple people, like a couple plus ones, right? At that, including my wife, who was like, I'm kind of here for the ride.
Mhm.
And then they had some of the most powerful epiphanies and got the most out of it because it's good for everybody, but you do need to opt in. Like you do need to set the intention and show up.
We're talking effectively about learning how to self-generate change in your life, right? This is like the essence of what we do
Yeah.
at these events. It is very difficult to do that on your own. Like, let's just use like I want to get healthy again. I want to start exercising every day. It's very hard to become very disciplined and step out and go running every morning if that's not part of your normal routine. What's way easier is a community of people where that is the culture.
Yeah.
We get up and we go running together each morning is the culture. When you immerse yourself in a community of people who are sort of unified by some kind of goal, the process of generating change, I've just found it to be way easier. It's just really hard to do on your own. So why not find like your people? Why not find your tribe?
Yeah. And you have to put yourself intentionally in a position, you don't get into a running club because you're just running down the street and you're like, oh, there's a pack of people. Now I'm in the club. Like you probably have to go look it up and meet at a place and start with them and show up a couple times. I mean, I think that's where the community muscle in short-term rentals is an emerging muscle, but it takes exercise, right? Like if you want to create a host group or an association in a state, there is now a rhythm and a little bit of a drumbeat. You look at Julie Marks in Vermont, you look at Dana Lubner in Denver. They're now on like fourth, fifth, sixth versions of these meetups and these conferences. And I just I see the genesis of that culture, right? Like you said, it's a lot easier when the whole culture, the whole group is already doing it. And I think that community formation, it's an act of creativity. There is some nothing there, and now there is something there. It's hard to define, right? Community is hard to define, but I just feel so excited. It's literally what I think I'm most excited about in all of my life, my business life right now, is the idea that we're seeing this finally happen where hosts, owners, managers are like, we all have this thing in common, but we just have never found each other and created some habits and some like cultural buy-in and muscle, cultural muscle to just learn how to do this.
And the step sounds like both easy and terribly vague, but you have to get up off of your couch and go to the meeting in person. And you have to be in proximity to one another and you need to get to know one another and you need to have new levels of conversations and learn new things about people that you didn't know before and share things about yourself that you've never shared before. Like that's the community building process. You have to give in order to get. And I think that, frankly, I think communities can save the world in a lot of these regards.
I feel like I'm forced to drop my favorite Margaret Mead quote right now, which is, and I usually don't get it exactly right, but never underestimate the power of a small group of passionate, dedicated individuals to change the world. Indeed, nothing else ever has.
Amen.
And you're creating now I think you have a tribe, a community, and you've been doing this for years, but I think with Here Goes Nothing, you've tapped it. You've tapped into like the root cause of what each person needs to kind of go up and out and like have that big life that they want.
Thank you, brother. I mean, having you there along the journey, we've followed one another's progress, but having you at one of these events just felt so special and also so fitting, so natural. And to have you see what I've been trying to explain but not quite able to is a great feeling. So thanks for the support.
Anytime, brother.